Today we have a figure review of Io from the game Code Vein. I'm going to preface this review by saying I've never actually played the game, and don't really intend to since it sounds like the type of game that'll take up tons of my time. So forgive me if I don't know some of the things related to the game that's on this figure, like that sword or the base. Io is made by one of the big figure companies, Kotobukiya. I've had various figures from Kotobukiya in the past, and they've always been pretty good, so I have high hopes for this one. She's a pretty small figure though, at 1/7 scale. Especially since she's in a sitting pose, she's only around 16 centimeters tall including the base. The sword of course is a lot taller, at around 24 centimeters, and makes the overall figure a lot bigger. The box is nicely designed, with a huge window area that shows Io and the sword prominently. The rest of the box has some photos of the figure itself, including some close-ups. There are also some nice stylized art in the background, which I presume is from the game, or at least related to it. Googling for photos of Io from the game, I came across a photo that shows her in this exact pose. I'm not sure if it's a fan art or an official game footage, but if it's the latter, I wish that Kotobukiya could have included a picture of it on the box somewhere. That would have been a nice touch. Io doesn't come with much accessories, just the sword and the base. Though Kotobukiya definitely put quality over quantity here, which is good. The sword is spectacular. It plugs into the base via a loose slot, and there isn't a point on the sword since it has to plug into the base. By the way, I wouldn't just display the sword since the connection point to the base is very loose, more of a guide really, so it doesn't stand up very securely by itself. Starting at the handle, there's decently sculpted grooves and very well painted shiny silver with black highlights in the grooves and on the side. Going down to the body of the sword, it's got amazing sculpting everywhere, with mechanical looking details and various pipes connecting everywhere. I like the saw edge sculpting on the spine of the sword as well. The pipes are painted in black, whereas the rest of it is an amazing dull bronze, with metallic gunmetal looking like it was dry brushed on top. It really gives the sword a realistically used look. The edge of the sword is in that shiny silver used in the handle, and is nicely painted. There's not much sculpted detail here though, of course. The base is another masterpiece. The red main parts of the base look like fresh blood, and that effect is amazingly done using darker red on the edges of the blood pools. The red is actually a clear red as well, which gives it that liquid looking feel. The rough areas in the middle look like a dead monster, maybe Cerberus since I see 3 heads on the animal. The shape is beautifully sculpted, with so much texture and detail. The painting is spectacular too, with the grooves and pits painted in a dark brown. This is definitely one of the most beautifully done bases for a figure I have right now. Kudos to Kotobukiya for putting the effort into these parts, where a lot of manufacturers usually just spend less time on. Io's silvery grey hair is nicely sculpted, with enough details and depth on the sculpting to create an illusion of layers of hair. There are separate strands done as well, and most of them look pretty good. Some of them do look a little bit too thick, but I think there's not much Kotobukiya could have done at this scale. The painting on the hair is really good as well, with a good gradation from the white to the light grey at the top of her hair to the ends. There's also great shadow painting in the sculpted grooves, which really help with that layered look. Kotobukiya actually sculpted ears on her, even though they're completely covered by the hair. I can't tell if there are details on it. All I can see is that there are ear shapes behind the hair. Her eyes are a bit lifeless, with simple white pupils and yellow irises. But looking at game footage, this is accurate. Otherwise, they look good. But when zoomed in closer, the eyes become slightly low res. I think this might be due to the simple color scheme of the eyes. Her nose is sculpted and is reasonably defined. Her mouth is a simple line sculpted, with some pink painting inside, and it looks fine. Overall, her face looks good, and is faithful to the game images. To nitpick though, I would have preferred more emotion from this sculpt. Io is wearing a thin choker and necklace, which is nicely painted in light grey, with a bronze-colored ornament. Even looking super closely, I can't tell if these are sculpted onto the body, or they're glued on separate pieces. Either way, good job on Kotobukiya's part. The thickness of the string is a bit too thick though. Talking about these ornaments all over her body, I do wish Io was in a bigger scale, like maybe 1/6. That way, the string on these ornaments can be made more delicate and more realistic in thickness. Her collarbone is nicely defined, but her shoulders are just a smooth sculpt. Her left arm doesn't have much anatomical details, with only a slight elbow bone sculpted. The lace on her bicep is very nicely done. There's tons of detail sculpted here, with shadow painted in the holes. But of course at this scale, there was no way to get the see-through skin tone underneath, which is a bit of a shame. Her forearm has more of that gray string with a bunch of the bronze ornaments. They look good, and even have little knots sculpted for each one. Her left hand has amazing sculpting, with long, slender fingers and very lightly painted fingernails. She even has the knuckles on her fingers sculpted. That's pretty cool. Io's right arm is pretty much the same as her left arm if we're talking about the anatomical details. But instead of the lace and the ornaments, she has bandages on her right forearm. These are incredibly detailed, and has detail painting to indicate the layers of the cloth. This is simply phenomenal. Her right hand is even better than the left hand, with more nicely sculpted fingers and knuckles, and all her fingers are separate. But the craziest thing are those two metal fingernails on her index and middle finger. They're sculpting on something this small, with great gunmetal paint, and they even painted the skin color in the holes to imitate that they are see-through. Moving to Io's dress, the top half is dominated by that ripped section, which shows her assets. The fabric strips here are sculpted nicely, and they're actually separate pieces that are away from the skin. There's almost no fabric folds here though, since her breasts are filling up the fabric. Talking about her breasts, they're well sculpted, with a realistic shape based on the fabric squeeze. Just under them, there's a small fabric knot sculpted, which looks pretty good. Beneath that, there's a big opening in the dress which shows her abs. There isn't any anatomical details here, but at least the fabric around it has thickness that is impressively thin. Going to Io's back, there's a semblance of shoulder blades sculpted here, as well as a light groove down her spine. Nothing spectacular here, but good enough. Io's skin tone is incredibly pale, and matches to what I found in the in-game footage. Kotobukiya didn't put too much highlight painting on her, only in a few areas, but it looks fine. The bottom half of her dress has nice fabric folds sculpted, especially on the left waist area and where the edge of her dress folds around her thighs. Kotobukiya even did the little rips on the dress edge. Moving to the back of her dress, there are some good fabric folds here, and highlight painting where the dress is tied in a little knot. The area under this, we see her skin, and the fabric section is, again, separate from her skin, which is really nice. We can even see the edge of her white underwear, with a separate little bow showing. The sides of her dress have holes sculpted too, and we can see more underwear detail under the holes. I'm really amazed at the level of details that are in areas which aren't really too visible. The long string ornament she has around her hips is a separate piece, and is just as nicely done as the other ones on her left arm. Io's right leg has a lot of the lace all over it. The sculpting is just as amazing as the lace on her left arm, with those holes filled in with the black paint. The leg itself has some thigh definition, a very slight bulge on the calf, and some ankle bones sculpted. Her foot looks good though, with a nicely sculpted sole and toes. The toenails are painted in a very light gloss skin color. Her left leg has those bandages all throughout, which looks amazing. There's texture on the overlapping layers of bandages, as well as crazy painting which really makes the whole area look incredible. There's even little areas of silver paint for the staples on the top of her thigh and at her ankles. Anatomical detail-wise, it's about the same as her right leg, except that there is a nice skin squeeze sculpted where the bandage meets the bare thigh. There's also no toes here, obviously, because they're now covered by the bandages. We pre-ordered this figure, but I really only wanted to get it because I saw how good the sword looked in the prototype photos. But after getting this figure, it really surprised me, in a good way. The amazing sculpting on the sword and base translated to the final product, and the figure is amazing in its own right. Kotobukiya shows why they are one of the titans of the anime figure industry. The only thing I can really nitpick with this figure is that it would have been better if it were in a larger scale. I think some of the jewelry would look a lot more delicate in scale if this was maybe in 1/6 scale. But either way, at a price of around 16,000 yen, it's reasonably priced for something of this quality. This is a figure I definitely would highly recommend to anyone looking for a great display piece.